We have a few minutes left if there's any other questions coming. I think we have one for Louisa, going back on reporting in Iraq. Is there any impact of you being a woman reporting in Iraq?
Yes and no. I mean, often when you sort of speak to people who maybe haven't visited, don't know very much about the culture, there is sometimes an assumption that it is the fact of me being a woman is something that would make my life more difficult. By and large, that is not the case. My Arabic is very poor, and my I think biggest regret is that as a woman, there are many spaces that could open up to me in a way that many men wouldn't be able to access. You go into any home and I will always sit with my male colleagues with the men. The women are all in the back. They're all talking half the time. They're listening and watching. If I spoke better Arabic, I would be able to go and sit with them, and that whole world would open up. And that is, one of my biggest faults as a reporter, that actually I can't do that. It can be immensely frustrating. But no, I mean, I don't think I think in some ways it is an advantage to be a woman, not to generalize about men, but women are sometimes more empathetic. I think sometimes we look at the world from a slightly different angle. And I think actually in a country where at least the Western media has nearly always focused so heavily on war and spectacular violence, it is actually a benefit to be a woman, and to be someone who comes in maybe with a slightly different set of eyes, I think.
I agree.
No, I completely agree. Like when I see the work of photographers who are working with a male reporter and a woman reporter, like there's a difference in the photography that you get back. And often I had to admit the work is better when they're working with a woman.
We'll take it.
We have one more question. Salwan, for you. What have you learned from covering trauma, especially when it comes to reflecting on your own and looking into others?
I mean, trauma, it's a good question, because a lot of times, people don't ask about the people who are on the ground. And Louisa was in Ukraine. I was recently in Ukraine and other areas, I'm sure, in life. And a lot of people take that for granted, like health, mental health. And I'm not going to say I was fortunate, because that's not cool, but I grew up in a really, during a hard time. I grew up in a place that was already trauma everywhere, wherever you look. If it's the condition of living in Iraq during the 90s and the sanctions and the country coming out from a war, if the things you see on TV, because as you know, like Middle Eastern TV, like right before they show a cartoon, they may show you a killing. So there's no filter there. Like, you grow up as a kid seeing all that violent, all that around you. So I don't know if that helped me or prepared me, but I know that I take that very serious. And I think the biggest thing is to really listen to yourself when after coming back from those things, and take time and they kind of like really don't always expose yourself to the stuff without really like making sure you're okay. Because you don't want to make a mistake as you are covering these kind of stuff that's like could be deadly, for example. And I'm talking in general. But I've learned a lot covering this stuff, and I've learned a lot through living as I grew up in Iraq and in Detroit as well. It was hard as well. That's what I'm hoping to share in my book, that people think, you come to the US, your life is great, everything, you're the American dream right away in your face, and that's not true. I confirm that through me, through many of my friends, through many of my family members. So you go through a lot of trauma, you go through a lot of stuff. People may grow up in different environment. Not everybody exposed to trauma early on, but for me, I've always been serious with it and make sure you're okay, and it's so important.
If I could just add,
yeah, go for it.
We, as I say, we did go to northwest Syria at one stage, and we were reporting a story that was very sensitive and very difficult, and it involved new orphans, children who had very recently lost their mothers and their fathers. And I don't know if it is linked, but I noticed that Salwan, I don't really remember working with children is difficult at the best of times, right? It is so sensitive. You have to be so careful. But we did these interviews with the full consent of the parents, and I think ethically. But Salwan was vital in that reporting. He wasn't just behind the camera. He was very much involved in the discussions with the children, setting them at ease, kind of understanding when maybe they were being spoken to in a more sort of official register that made them a bit more anxious. And I don't know if that is related to past trauma, to having seen children go through similar things, to just being a great and empathetic person, but it made the difference between being able to do that story right and not at all, because if you don't do that, you risk running roughshod over the sort of emotions and possible future trauma of these children. And it was something I really noticed that, Salwan, you were, amazing at it.
Excellent. We're at time, but I want to ask one last question to the both of you, bringing it back to the 20th anniversary of the Iraq War. Something that you mentioned at some point, Louisa, in our previous conversation, and through the work that you're doing for this anniversary, but also the work that you've been doing these past few years, and also Salwan, through that personal story, do you feel that Americans have forgotten about the Iraq War?
Yeah.
Have done a lot to Iraq, which is, America's my second home, but it was really hard to watch that and go to Iraq and see it, what the result was. Nothing has improved. It got maybe even worse, and it was like a false dream that was sold to the Iraqi people that turned into a nightmare, and they're still trying to wake up from it.
I think it's a very dark chapter in American history. What happened, in the way that most Americans interact with it, if they interact with it at all, is through knowing, that it got very difficult, it got very dangerous, many soldiers died. And I think the thing that a lot of people don't realize is just the incalculable toll it took on Iraqis then and now. Some estimates are much higher, but of the counted, documented deaths among Iraqis, 288 violent deaths in the period after the war and after the civil war that followed. 210 of those were civilians. That means that people are growing up today without mothers, without fathers, without sisters, without brothers. The ramifications of this and the reverberations of it are being felt today. They're very alive. And I don't think most people realize that outside of the country.
Okay. Well, thank you very much, Salwan, Louisa, for this discussion. And thank you for everyone that attended. We really appreciate your question.
Thank you.
Thank you.